Should the Nashville Predators trade a goaltender for the New Jersey Devils' top 10 draft pick? We're going to debate that on today's Locked On Predators podcast.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast, and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are your free daily Nashville Predators podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off this episode the way we kick off all of our episodes, and that is with a shout out to our Locked On Pred heads. Those are our everyday listeners who tune in to talk Nashville Predators hockey with us each and every day. We thank you for your support, and we love that we get to spend a little bit of your day with you. I'm Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer at Penalty Box Radio, and I have a partner in crime.
You do. I'm Emma Lingen, and I am the Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
So, big story that Emma and I are going to dive into on today's show. News dropped that the New Jersey Devils, a team that is in that win now mode, has said they may be willing to deal their number 10 draft pick if the price is right. And what are they in need of most, my friends? They're sniffing around for a goaltender. We're going to talk about how this news could affect the Nashville Predators at the draft and in the future. A lot to get to with this topic. But before we dive into all of that, want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, Emma, this is a juicy one. Juicy news broke. Reports surfaced yesterday that New Jersey Devils GM Tom Fitzgerald has said he may be willing to trade their number 10 draft pick in the 2024 draft if the price is right. And what they're really wanting, my friends, they're wanting a goaltender. And this is such an interesting scenario. You've got the New Jersey Devils. This is a team that is definitely in kind of win now mode. They've just made some big changes, hired Sheldon Keefe on May 23rd to take over. But the biggest thing that New Jersey Devils seem to be missing is that reliable netminder. And this automatically stirs up big feelings among the Nashville Predators fan base, because this is not the first time that we've talked about the New Jersey Devils and Nashville Predators goaltenders, Emma.
No, like you said, Tom Fitzgerald and the Devils came sniffing around during the trade deadline too. They said, hey, we really like that Juuse Saros guy. And, obviously that was not something that ended up happening, but it was something I think that's always kind of been on the back burner. New Jersey did go out and they added Jake Allen at the deadline. He did very well for them, but he's an older guy. He's not a guy that they're going to build their team around. And I think that, they're going to be looking for someone like a true number one goaltender. And obviously, that's Juuse Saros' name has been out there as someone who, could be a trade ship for the Nashville Predators coming up. I know that, there are a few goalies out there, though, that could kind of fit what Fitzgerald is looking for. I think, there was news that the Devils were close to getting Jacob Markstrom from Calgary at the deadline. And that he had even waived his no movement clause to go to the Devils, but I guess it fell through because I think the Flames weren't willing to retain any salary on him, so that deal fell through. And you're kind of it's harder to make deals around the deadline, or the trade deadline than it is in the off season. And neither of those teams are really in win now mode at the trade deadline. So I think that it was, it makes sense that didn't go through. But yeah, now that he's come out there and said that he's willing to entertain the idea of trading that number 10 pick, it gets interesting because we know that the Nashville Predators and Barry Trotz, they like their draft picks.
Yeah.
Lord knows they have a lot of them already, though.
They do. And so this is an interesting scenario that you kind of have to look at from a number of different angles. You look at it from, like you said, New Jersey Devils. This is a team that's in win now mode. They obviously need to fill that goaltending situation. Like you said, they went out and got Jake Allen, but it's a little bit like plugging a hole in a dam with some chewing gum. Like, they really need to make a bigger decision in net, maybe a little bit of a longer term decision in that. Of course, Tom Fitzgerald was in town for that inaugural season reunion around the trade deadline, and there was talk, with Barry Trotz about goaltending. So it's almost instantly when I read this article, I'm like, oh man, here we go. Here we go. It's the Juuse Saros New Jersey Devils storyline all over again. It's interesting because when you look at this from the New Jersey Devils perspective, with regards to the Nashville Predators goaltending situation, really the only option for New Jersey is Juuse Saros. And I think that's something we have to be really clear on. The New Jersey Devils are not going to be sniffing around for Yaroslav Askarov. That's just not what they're looking for. This is a team that is in, like we said, win now mode, and they're not going to take the time to invest in a goaltender who doesn't have that kind of NHL experience. And Juuse Saros is exactly what they're looking for, because he's not at the end of his career, like you mentioned with Jake Allen. This is somebody who could be a longer term piece, whether you like his performance this past season for the Predators or not. Juuse Saros is, a top 5, top 7 goaltender in the league. He is the guy that you want in net if you are as close as the Devils are. What I think is interesting is what New Jersey wasn't willing to do at the trade deadline, because I think, like, for me, I was like, okay, if you want Juuse Saros, you're going to have to put a lot on the table. And because they're in win now mode, there weren't a lot of pieces they were willing to put on the trade table. And so it'll be interesting to see, is a draft pick enough for Nashville to make a deal when it comes to Juuse Saros? Is this enough?
I can tell you right now, it's not.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's, I mean, I know that's your opinion, but that's also just fact. I think that it's not going to be enough. The Predators, I just said it, they have enough draft picks. And, yes, it's a top 10 pick, but you have to think about it. This year's draft class is, I would classify this year's class as very average for a draft class. Like, not bad, but I mean, last year's draft class was significantly better and deeper, right, I think, at every position. Obviously, there's no Connor Bedard this year. Macklin Celebrini's close. But again, we're not even talking about Macklin Celebrini because he's going to go number 1 to San Jose. So once you get off, like, below him, I mean, there really isn't anyone from this year's draft class that jumps out at me as like, oh, this would be worth trading Juuse Saros for, even if it came with something else, even if it was like the number 10 pick and like a prospect or 2 prospect or whatever. Like, to me, there's no one, if we're just looking at the draft class, there's no one that jumps out at me as like, oh, the Preds need this guy. Right. And I think that, you mentioned what the Devils weren't willing to do at the trade deadline. And I think that's important, because if you're looking at, with Juuse Saros, Barry Trotz has said, certainly everything's on the table when it comes to that. He's going to listen to offers. But that doesn't mean that he's just going to trade him to whoever wants him. I think it's going to be the asking price for Juuse Saros. And I said this at the trade deadline, I'm going to say it again. Whatever you listeners, whoever in your head, whatever you have is the asking price for Juuse Saros, like what you think it should be, I promise you it's higher than that. Just from talking to Barry Trotz, from talking to Ben Vanderklok, the goalie coach, like I just trust me when I say the asking price is higher than you think it is. And I think that New Jersey has pieces that could be, in that conversation. If we're talking like, oh, we'll give you the number 10 pick and Jack Hughes for Juuse Saros. Okay, now we're having a conversation.
Let's sit down. But
that's not going to happen, obviously,
Right.
because the New Jersey is trying to build their team too. They're not in a tear down right now. They're not like selling everybody off to get a great goalie. They have pieces and they want to continue to build around those pieces. So like the pieces that Nashville would theoretically be interested in when it comes to entertaining a trade offer for Juuse Saros are going to be pieces that New Jersey is not going to want to part with.
Right.
So I think that to me, that's just a non-starter, I think, with this whole conversation.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I love what you say about whatever you think the asking price is for Saros, it's higher, because I feel like there are a lot of people around the Nashville Predators in the fan base that feel like, look, we've got Yaroslav Askarov. Let's bring him up. But I think you underestimate what that does to the timeline for a reset for the Nashville Predators. If you trade Saros and say, we are going to go all in on Yaroslav Askarov. Coming up, we're going to talk about what it may look like if the Nashville Predators did trade Juuse Saros. How would the Predators even bridge that gap? What does that do to the Predators timeline? We're also going to hear from Jeff Kelty, who talked about this draft class. His insight may tell you just how willing the Predators would be to do a deal like this. We're going to talk about that coming up in just a moment. First, want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Friends, it is winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 that you can bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. If you have not gotten in on the action at FanDuel, now is the time to do it. You have the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals kicking off. You can check out all of the action for both of those championship runs. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So, Emma, I love what you say about this draft class, because we can talk about trading Juuse Saros and what that means for the Predators. We are going to do that. You can talk about the New Jersey Devils and what they need and what adding a piece like Saros would mean. But let's talk about, what do the Predators really get if they were to move up? They have the 22nd pick in the draft right now. If they were to move up to get that number 10 pick, what would that really mean for the Nashville Predators? And I love this comment that Jeff Kelty made when he was talking about the draft and the preparation from the draft. This is what he had to say just a week or so ago.
I think it's probably average, maybe not quite as good or as deep as last year, but drafts are always deemed as good or bad or deep or what have you. And you can go back years later and there's always players in every draft. So, I think that you always kind of evaluate it, as a whole, and you're always talking about those sorts of things. But every year there's good players to be had in every round. And that's really the goal of the group, to kind of go through that and like I always say, use the whole draft. We have good opportunity with a lot of picks early in the draft, but you never know what can happen with different trade scenarios. You may end up having picks later in the draft that we need to be ready for. So it's a long process, but our guys are really thorough, and I think we always do a good job. So
I think it's so interesting when he talks about there are good players in every draft, regardless of the top pick, but you really do look at this draft, I think, very differently based on last year's draft, because last year's draft was almost lightning in a bottle when you look at the quality of these players, these top 5-6 players in this draft. And I'm not sure you have that same scenario this year. And there's such a disparity because they're back-to-back drafts that it makes you say, okay, do the Predators really gain much going from 22nd to 10th? And is that worth it? So how big of a difference do you really think there is in quality if the Predators moved up, Emma?
I think it relies on a lot of different factors. If we're just talking about purely best player available, honestly, my opinion is that in this year's draft, it doesn't make enough of a difference
Right.
to go from 22nd to 10th. Now, if you're going from 22nd to 5th, okay,
Different ball
maybe
game.
a little
Yeah.
different. But again, this class is not that deep. Beyond really the top 3, it's kind of the Wild West. Like, we don't know where people, like who's going to draft who. And I've seen so many mock drafts that have, a lot of times when you get this closer to the draft, you see a lot of mock drafts from different outlets. They have similar guys. It's usually like, okay, the Predators are probably going to draft one of these 3 guys because that's who's showing up on all the mock drafts. These mock drafts are all over the board. Like,
Right.
it's just very, uncertain right now. And so I would say, again, with the depth, or really the lack of depth in this year's draft class, I'm not convinced that trading from 22nd up to 10th is really gonna move the needle that much for me. And then also just looking specifically at the players in this class and looking at what the Predators need. One thing that has been talked about, obviously Barry Trotz has talked about it numerous times, that he wants to get faster and he wants to add depth down the middle. This team needs centers. They need centers badly. And so
Right.
that's certainly one area. But then another area that Jeff Kelty actually mentioned during that press conference that we just heard from was that they're looking to add some guys, some size on defense. They
Right.
really, got Tanner Mollendijk last year, like fantastic, speedy, quick defenseman, good scorer, but not the biggest guy.
Right.
And that's kind of, even if you're looking at the guys who are coming up or who could be coming up, the Spencer Stastnys, the Mark Del Gaizos, all great defensemen, but they're not big guys. And
Right.
not that being big is the only measure of a defenseman. But I think if you look at the Predators playoff series against the Vancouver Canucks, that really opened a lot of eyes, and including Barry Trotz's eyes, as far as like, ooh, this exposed a big weakness of ours. Vancouver's defensive core is also just otherworldly. They're all gigantic, but I
Yes,
think
they
it's like,
are.
if you look at, other than Jeremy Lauzon and Luke Shen, the Preds didn't have anyone on the back end with any kind of size whatsoever, and that exposed them a lot. And so I think that keeping that in mind, and then looking at this year's draft class, and of course, these kids are young. We can call them kids with these
We
guys
will.
because they
Yes.
actually are kids.
Yes.
These kids are young. They're still developing. They're not going to be, at probably their peak size or conditioning or what have you yet. But just looking at the defensemen in this draft class, there isn't really anyone that's jumping out at me that I'm like, oh, I'd like to see the Predators trade up to get him, because a lot of these guys I feel like would still be there or could still be there,
Right.
by the time you get down to 22nd. So, and again, you get guys like Kelty said that there are going to be guys in every draft and in every round. I mean, just yesterday we talked about Juuse Saros, 7th round pick. Like, you never know what you're going to get. So I just, again, I think if we were having this conversation last year, it might have been a different conversation.
Totally agree.
This year, I don't know. I'm not convinced.
Yeah. And so much about drafting. I am amazed and in awe of Jeff Kelty and the entire, scouting group, because so much about the NHL draft is just straight up wizardry, because you are looking at players who are, like you said, they're kids. They're very, very young. They are not at their physical peak. You have so much time between when they are drafted and when they can be NHL ready. It's just so much of it is a crapshoot, especially in a draft class like this one, as compared again to last year. This is a little bit of a crapshoot in the draft. So if the Nashville Predators were considering moving Juuse Saros for a top, this top 10 New Jersey Devils pick, you and I have said, this is not going to be a 1-for-1 deal. What would it take for you to say, okay, you know what? We'll take that 10th round pick and
Jack
fill in the
Hughes.
blank.
I wasn't exaggerating when I said that earlier. I mean, that is going to be the kind of asking price that the Predators will have in mind for Juuse Saros. And
Yeah.
it's going to be, now if the Devils were in full rebuild mode and they were looking to sell, then that would be a different conversation. But they're
Right.
not. They're not getting rid of Hughes. They're not getting rid of Heischer or any of those are the guys that they are building their team around, as they should, understandably. So I just think that of course it makes total sense why, people are linking the Preds and the Devils together when it's like, well, Devils need a goalie, Preds have one, who knows? And
Right.
it's like, okay, but I just don't think you have to look at where these organizations are, like in their organizational timeline. And I just don't think that makes a ton of sense. Now, what I find interesting, and again, this could be completely wishful thinking because I've already made it clear I don't think the Preds should trade Juuse Saros. But if you're looking at other options for New Jersey, could revisit Markstrom if they can get the numbers to work. Linus Ullmark from Boston.
Very interesting. Now, you want to talk about a good get?
Very available. Very available. And Boston is not going to be asking for the same kind of return for him that the Predators would for Juuse Saros, because Boston has Jeremy Swayman. They have their guy. And so, I mean, to me, that's just something, because I'm sure that Tom Fitzgerald listens to our show. So, if you're listening, Tom, I would go talk to the guys in Boston.
Let us make a suggestion.
Yeah. For what it's worth. That's my 2 cents. I'm here. I'm available if you need any more advice. But
I love that. So coming up, we're just gonna play the what if game. So what if the Nashville Predators did decide to trade Juuse Saros, whether it is to the New Jersey Devils for the number 10 pick or just in general? Emma and I are just going to be real about how we feel about what it would mean to lose Juuse Saros for the Nashville Predators moving forward. All right, I think we've made it pretty clear that it would take a lot for you and I to pull the trigger on a deal with the New Jersey Devils to trade for Juuse Saros. Like, yes, please pass the Jack Hughes. That's kind of what we're looking for this number 10 draft pick. But let's just go bigger on this, regardless of whether it is with the New Jersey Devils for the 10th pick or whatever. We know that the conversation is swirling about what is Barry Trotz going to do with Juuse Saros. Is he going to trade him? So let's just have the conversation, Emma. What would losing Juuse Saros mean for the Predators? Wherever he goes, however it would happen, what would this mean for Nashville?
I mean, frankly, I think it would be devastating. I think it would completely set back their timeline for, this reset or whatever you want to call it, for being cup contenders. I think it would set them back exponentially more than a lot of people realize. If you're trying to build a team, you're trying to build a cup contender, like the best way to do it is to start from the crease out. And the Predators are already in this fantastic situation because you got the crease covered. That's like the one thing that you have for sure figured out. If you're committed to Juuse Saros as your long-term starting goaltender, which we have already made clear we think that they should be. But I think that it's just very short-sighted when people will argue like, well, there's a Skarov, he's right there, like bring him up. Okay, but that sets everything back,
Thank you.
With everything. And we talked about Askarov yesterday and how it would be a huge adjustment, not only for him, but for the rest of the team and the system that Andrew Brunette is trying to implement. And I think that it's the last really 2 seasons, there's been a lot of upheaval, a lot of turnover within this organization, both, in the locker room, in the front office, what have you. I think this is the year that finally we're just going to kind of settle in. And this is, we've established the culture. Like this is not the time to be making large sweeping changes and changing a goaltender or trading Juuse Saros would be a large sweeping change that I think the Predators would not be wise to make right now. And I don't think they're trying to right now.
Yeah. I also think you have to look at what else is happening with the Predators roster, especially on defense, because you have just now lost Ryan McDonagh, who, just is one of those reliable defensemen. So Ryan McDonagh is now gone. We don't know what's happening with Alexander Carrier. It appears that Spencer Stastny, is going to be coming up. Maybe Mark Del Gaizo may get a shot. One of the things you need when you have that kind of transition happening with the blue line is you've got to have quality goaltending. Like, you need reliability in net. You cannot be massively tinkering with your defensemen and throw in a different goaltender in net. You can't do both of those at the same time. And I feel like Nashville is already making big changes with the blue line. I agree with what you say. Like, I love some of the moves that they made, but they're going to have to continue to do more moves. They are going to have to get bigger on defense. So this is not just hey, give it a season or two for Spencer Stastny to settle in. This is going to be several seasons to get the defense where the Nashville Predators want them to be a serious, deep playoff run team. You do not want to be jacking with the blue line and the goaltender's crease at the same time. Like, you can't do that and expect to find success and to continue moving closer to cup contention at the same time. You just can't do it.
No. And Juuse Saros is your safety net. He is your safety net. We saw it last season, or I guess now technically 2 seasons ago, the 22-23 season. He was the only reason. I'm sorry. Look, I love me some Luke Evangelista and Phil Tomasino and everyone else. Juuse Saros is the reason that they were even in the conversation to be in the playoffs, that they were even sniffing the playoffs. Now, ultimately fell just short, which is not surprising considering the state of the team at that time. Yeah. And, that's not surprising. But the fact that they weren't eliminated mathematically until there were 2 games left in the season. And I think that is all Juuse Saros. That yes, I think that people have a lot of recency bias. If you're looking at his performance this past season, was not his best. But even again, Juuse Saros at maybe not his best is still better than a lot of goaltenders out there. And I think that the value that he has on the trade market is not going to match the value that he has to this organization in Nashville, because I think that they have valued him so highly. Now, with that said, the argument might be like, well, okay, then why haven't they come out and said, why hasn't Barry Trotz come out and said like, oh, we're not trading him. We're committed to him long term. Well, because that would be stupid for 100%. Him to do that.
That's not how he plays the game.
No, that's not how any self-respecting GM should play the game. Like, you have to be like, well, there's a chance, and again, I think that I do genuinely believe, if the Devils came and said like, hey, let's talk about Jack Hughes, then I do think that Barry would listen. But I just think that there's, you can't just come out and say like, oh, nope, sorry, everyone, we're not trading him, because then,
nobody calls.
Yeah, nobody calls you and offers you anything that you might not even know that you wanted or that was available. And right now he has the upper hand and he kind of has the leverage here in this situation. And so I think, and plus he can't even talk about signing Saros to an extension until July 1st, and it's probably not even going to happen then. So it's one of those things that like, it's fun to speculate about. I understand. And, of course, Juuse Saros is still technically available on the trade market.
Right.
So it's fun to have these conversations and these hypotheticals, but I just think that you got to be realistic about it. Look at where Nashville is, look at where New Jersey is, just in their organizational timelines, and kind of maybe recognize that it's not the best fit for either team.
Just because a player is your best trade piece doesn't mean trading him is your best move. And I think that's where the confusion is. That's where the conversation kind of pivots when it comes to Juuse Saros. Is Juuse Saros the most valuable trade piece that the Nashville Predators have on their roster right now? Yeah, probably. Doesn't mean that that's the best move for the team. He may bring you the best return, but if that return isn't worth what you give up, it's a non-starter for this. Part of what I think also continues to fuel this Juuse Saros trade fire is Kevin Lankinen, because Kevin Lankinen has been very, very good. I think you could look at a scenario where, hey, okay, you know what? If we traded Saros, we bring in Kevin Lankinen back for a couple seasons, have him start, put Askarov as the backup. And I think that Kevin Lankinen, his performance, his play adds a little bit of fuel to the Juuse Saros fire. But again, I come back to, and look, here's what's real. I love Kevin Lankinen. I love Kevin Lankinen. I think he is really incredible as a person. I think he's got a ton of potential in net. Would love to see him get a starting job. But even to do that, using Kevin Lankinen as sort of a bridge to Askarov still is not the same as having Juuse Saros in net through a reset. It's just not.
It's not. It's not going to give you the stability that you need on the back end through all the changes, like you were saying, especially on the blue line. That's not, Kevin Lankinen for sure deserves to be a starter, which, hey, New Jersey, if you're sniffing, he's a free agent. Just saying, he's another guy that I don't want to see go, because I just
love him.
One of the best parts of my day ever is just seeing him. And
yes.
If I had enough money, I would just pay him to follow me around and give me pep talks all the time, because
he needs to be a life coach. I'm telling you, I'm like, you need to be a life coach, because I get done talking to him and I'm like, I will run through a brick wall and believe in myself while I do it.
Or even a therapist. Sometimes
yes!
I'll talk to him, and I won't be talking to him about deeply serious things, but still sometimes the understanding, you really feel like he's hearing you and he's understanding you. I was like,
so great.
Wow, that was so therapeutic, thank you. Even
so
if you're
great.
just talking about the weather, it'll be like, it's really nice outside. He'll be like, yeah, it really is. And I'm like, wow, I feel so understood. This is so nice.
He really is so terrific. He is so terrific. And I agree with you. This is a guy that could have a starting job. Hey, New Jersey. Is he exactly what they're looking for? I don't know, but could he be? Perhaps. The problem is Nashville would get nothing in return for it. But you know what? Sometimes you gotta play the long game, especially where Nashville is right now in a reset. You really have to play the long game. And just because Juuse Saros is your most valuable trade piece doesn't mean you trade him.
Correct.
We'll see. So, the GMs, they're at the combine, they're talking, they're wheeling, dealing, they're winking, they're passing notes. We'll see what comes of this. It's just an interesting conversation where New Jersey is, where the Nashville Predators are, and the goaltending situation. We'll see what happens with that. Coming up later this week, we are going to continue our season superlatives. We're working through the defensemen now. A lot to talk about with the defense as well. Before we wrap up this episode, though, Emma, tell us, where can everybody find you on social media, and where can they find your work?
They can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Emma_Lingan. That's Lingan, because that seems to be an issue for a lot of people. And you can find my work online at The Hockey News.
You can find me on social media at @AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find my work at Penalty Box Radio. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're going to be back tomorrow with some more season superlatives. We'll see you then.